A dedicated cop faces a death sentence for a crime he insists he never committed. As the clock ticks down to his execution, his devoted German Shepherd refuses to leave his side, guided by a mysterious intuition that no one else seems to sense. Then, the dog takes an unexpected action that unearths a stunning secret, one that could overturn everything. With long-buried truths beginning to resurface, the ultimate question remains: will the truth emerge in time to save him? Officer Jacob Cooper sat motionless in the defendant's chair, the harsh glare of fluorescent lights etching deep shadows onto his face. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, photographers, and anxious onlookers, all waiting for the verdict. Moments earlier, the judge had pronounced Jacob guilty of murdering Thomas Reyes, a renowned businessman implicated in a money laundering scheme run by a notorious criminal organization. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented, Jacob had proclaimed his innocence from the start. For years, he had served as a dedicated police officer, steadfast in his commitment to justice. Now he faced the death penalty for a crime he adamantly maintained he did not commit. Yet, according to the prosecution, the evidence against him was too damning to dismiss. As the bailiffs fastened the handcuffs around his wrists, Jacob's heart pounded with a desperate intensity, as if it were trying to break free. He forced himself to breathe slowly, recalling his training, remain composed, maintain focus. It all felt surreal. One moment, he was on the trail of a major criminal operation, and the next, he was condemned as a killer. At the rear of the courtroom, Detective Nora Mitchell observed in silent despair. She had been Jacob's partner through countless cases, from petty thefts to sprawling drug conspiracies, and had always admired his unwavering integrity. Now, witnessing his conviction, she wrestled with a storm of doubts. Could the evidence be mistaken, or had she overlooked something vital about Jacob all along? Outside, the tense silence of the corridor was shattered by frantic barking. Toby, Jacob's loyal German Shepherd, was tethered to a metal bench, straining against his leash. The dog's desperate barks echoed off the cold stone walls as if warning of a hidden truth. He seemed to sense the depth of his handler's distress, or perhaps something even more profound. A police van idled at the curb as Jacob was led down the courthouse steps, surrounded by a flurry of flashing cameras and relentless questions from reporters. Toby lunged forward, his ears pinned back and teeth bared in a frantic snarl, pleading for someone to heed his silent warning. Though Jacob couldn't see the loyal face of his companion, he could still hear the echoing barks in his mind as the van doors closed, sealing him away from hope. Sitting alone in his jail cell that night, Jacob mulled over how the prosecution had meticulously built their case. Every detail had been presented in a way that left little room for doubt, a perfect, damning narrative that was nearly impossible to challenge. They showcased the gunshot residue found on his hands, a grainy security video that appeared to place someone resembling him near the scene of Thomas Reyes's murder, and even a mysterious eyewitness who claimed to have overheard Jacob arguing with Reyes just moments before the fatal shot. The prosecutor had insisted these pieces were airtight, completely dismissing any possibility of reasonable doubt. Yet, as Jacob replayed the trial in his mind, the evidence struck him as disturbingly too neat, as if each piece had been arranged with deliberate, calculated precision. Thomas Reyes had been a polarizing figure. On the surface, a successful businessman with investments in real estate, shipping, and more. But behind that polished image, rumors swirled of his involvement in money laundering for a notorious crime syndicate. Jacob had barely started delving into Reyes's activities when everything spiraled out of control. Was it possible that someone had orchestrated Reyes's murder to silence him while framing Jacob as the fall guy? In the oppressive darkness of his cell, Jacob closed his eyes and replayed every moment of his recent freedom. He had been on the verge of uncovering something monumental. Now, left in isolation, he could only wonder how deep the corruption truly ran, and who had the power to manipulate events so perfectly to frame him. After the trial, Nora lingered in the nearly deserted courtroom. Everyone had already departed, leaving only a lone janitor sweeping discarded papers off the floor. The image of Jacob being led away in handcuffs, with that determined yet confused expression in his eyes, remained etched in her mind. They had been partners for years, and she knew his principles were unwavering. Yet, the more she rationalized it, an unsettling feeling grew within her. The evidence painted a flawless picture, but experience had taught her that real crimes rarely aligned so perfectly. Was she overlooking a crucial detail? With her detective instincts ignited, Nora vowed at that moment that she would stop at nothing to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. In the days that followed, Jacob's new existence unfolded within the confines of a cramped, concrete cell, bordered by cold metal bars and a thin, worn mattress. Every morning, the harsh clang of cell doors and the piercing gazes of hardened inmates, quick to label him as an ex-cop, greeted him. Death row was perilous enough, but being a former police officer behind bars was virtually a death sentence in its own right. Daily, he replayed his final moments outside. He had been investigating a series of dubious transactions linked to a shipping company, and Reyes's name repeatedly surfaced. Then, almost overnight, he found himself cast as the prime suspect in Reyes's murder. Why me? He questioned over and over. Who had orchestrated such a flawless plot that even his fellow officers had come to believe in his guilt? Outside the prison, Nora took temporary responsibility for Toby. Back at her apartment, the German Shepherd paced from door to window, whining, barking at random intervals, clearly distressed by Jacob's absence. She fed him and tried to comfort him, but Toby would often pad to the closet where Jacob's old police jacket hung. He would sniff it and let out a low whimper. One evening, the dog latched onto a specific, mud-stained jacket Jacob had worn during a recent stakeout. Toby tugged at the leash, urging Nora to follow. Something about his insistence made Nora's detective instincts spark. She decided to trust the dog's nose. Despite the late hour, she put Toby in her car and let him guide her. It was past midnight, the city streets mostly deserted. The dog barked and pressed his nose to the car window as they neared the waterfront. Eventually, Nora parked by a dilapidated dock. Seagulls scattered at the sudden arrival of headlights. Toby jumped out, sniffing the air, and trotted toward a cluster of old shipping containers. What she didn't expect was that this was where people called when they found Reyes. Nora took a flashlight and followed, heart pounding with anticipation. This must be connected to Jacob's case, she thought. If so, it might be the first clue that his conviction was built on a lie. The docks were practically abandoned, rusted beams and boarded-up warehouses looming in the dark. Toby sniffed around a corner near a pile of rotting wooden crates. Suddenly, he barked sharply, pawing at the ground. Nora shone her flashlight and spotted a single spent bullet casing, half buried in trash. Carefully, she picked it up with gloved hands and placed it in an evidence bag. Not far from the casing, she found a charred scrap of a Sea-Link shipping logo, a company rumored to be a front for large-scale money laundering. The edges were singed, as though someone had tried to burn it. Sea-Link had come up in the original investigation that Jacob was involved in, right before his arrest. Could it be a coincidence? Tension began to rise. If this bullet casing did not match the caliber of Jacob's service weapon, it might be the break she needed to challenge the prosecution's airtight narrative. She gave Toby a grateful pat on the head. The dog wagged his tail as if to say, "We're on the right track." A couple of days later, the ballistics results arrived. Nora's contact at the forensics lab confirmed that the bullet casing belonged to a specialized firearm, typically issued to SWAT teams or elite tactical units, definitely not from Jacob's standard issue handgun. Relief and dread washed over Nora simultaneously. Relief because this evidence could exonerate Jacob. Dread because it suggested that someone with high-level access, perhaps even someone within the department, had fired the fatal shot that killed Thomas Reyes, and that evidence had been deliberately manipulated to frame him. Determined, she immediately contacted Jacob's defense lawyer, urging him to incorporate this new development. However, the lawyer's tone was somber. He explained that a single piece of evidence might not be enough to overturn a murder conviction quickly. Appeals take time, and the prosecution could argue that the casing was either unrelated or had been discovered too late. Undeterred, Nora began to methodically investigate every detail connected to C-Link, Reyes's financial records, and any potential links within law enforcement. Meanwhile, Jacob's situation in prison grew increasingly perilous. One morning, he discovered a small note tucked into his meal tray bearing a stark warning: "Stop or die." It was clear someone wanted him silenced. He couldn't shake the feeling of hostility emanating from Officer Green, the guard in charge of his cell block, whose lingering, disdainful stares and offhand comments about how easily an inmate could be taken care of sent shivers down Jacob's spine. Confrontations became unavoidable. A few inmates, likely coerced or even bribed, cornered him in the yard on multiple occasions, forcing him into violent encounters. The constant tension and fear built within him as he worried that if nothing changed soon, he might not survive long enough to see his official sentence carried out. In her apartment, Nora pored over digital records with the assistance of Levi, a cybersecurity expert who had worked alongside her and Jacob in the past. Levash had an exceptional knack for tracing hidden financial trails. As they delved deeper into C-Link's transactions, one name kept recurring: Deputy Chief Marcus Grayson, a highly respected officer who had climbed the ranks with remarkable speed. Nora stared at the screen in disbelief as Grayson's name appeared in a series of suspicious transactions, funneling money between C-Link and offshore accounts. Publicly hailed as a reform-minded, media-savvy leader, the data suggested that Grayson might be the puppet master behind a sprawling money laundering operation. If that were the case, he had every motive to eliminate Thomas Reyes, a potential turncoat ready to expose the operation, and to frame Jacob, the officer who had been hot on the trail of the entire scheme. The real challenge lay in proving it. Grayson's power within the department was vast, and concrete evidence would be essential to bring him down. The deeper Nora and Levi dug, the more it became clear that Grayson was aware they were closing in on him. Her suspicions were brutally confirmed when Nora's apartment was broken into late one night. Although a hidden camera she had installed in the bookshelf captured the intruders, nothing major was stolen. Only her sensitive files were rifled through. At the same time, Luis Vega, a key witness who had provided crucial leads about C-Link, vanished without a trace. Investigators found signs of a struggle at his home and traces of blood, but no body, suggesting a forceful abduction. Fear clenched Nora's heart as she realized that one by one, those who knew too much were being silenced. When she reached out to the few trusted colleagues still in the force, their nervous warnings echoed in her mind. Watch your back. This goes higher up than you think. Determined to expose the truth, Nora knew she had no choice but to push forward, even if it meant going against some of her own superiors. Within the prison walls, Jacob found himself under constant attack. During a routine exercise period, a group of inmates deliberately blocked his path. The leader of the group sneered, "The boss wants you to keep your mouth shut." Right before they surged forward, fists flew in a blur as Jacob fought back, drawing on his police combat training, yet he was quickly overwhelmed by their sheer numbers. A crushing blow to his ribs sent him reeling, and another devastating hit brought him crashing to the ground. Just as one inmate readied a knockout strike, Officer Green appeared, but instead of intervening, he simply stood aside with a cold smirk. It was only when a second guard finally arrived that Green pretended to take action, dispersing the attackers. Wheezing and battered, Jacob realized he had no real allies on the inside. If he stayed, he might never survive long enough to see his appeal. It was clear that someone had orchestrated this brutal assault. Desperation drove him to hope for help from the outside, and that help needed to come quickly. As witnesses continued to vanish, Nora reached out to Ray Callahan, the old mentor she and Jacob had once revered. Ray, a retired and once highly respected officer who had left the force due to health issues, agreed to meet in a discreet restaurant tucked away on a quiet street corner. There, Nora laid out her findings: the bullet casing discovered at the dock, the suspicious financial transactions linking Deputy Chief Grayson to C-Link, and the escalating threats emanating from within the prison. Ray listened with a heavy heart before reluctantly admitting that he had been aware of Grayson's darker side. Over the years, Grayson had forged dangerous alliances with a powerful crime syndicate, using his influence within law enforcement as a protective shield. Ray's voice trembled with regret as he confessed, "I used to investigate them, but I stopped, in exchange for money and favors. It was a mistake, but once you're entangled, there's no easy escape." When Nora pressed him about Reyes's murder, Ray lowered his gaze and murmured, "Grayson killed Reyes. He framed Jacob because he got too close to the truth." Nora's heart pounded as she discreetly recorded his words, knowing they could serve as vital evidence. Still, Ray's final warning echoed in her ears. "Don't underestimate Grayson. If he finds out I've talked, I'm dead. You might be too." Armed with Ray's confession, Nora and Levi worked tirelessly through the night. Levi managed to hack into the department's archives, uncovering logs that Grayson had attempted to erase. One of the logs placed Grayson right at the scene of Thomas Reyes's murder on the exact night it occurred, long before any other unit had arrived. Another log revealed that a specialized firearm from the SWAT team's arsenal had been inexplicably taken on the very day of the murder. These findings perfectly matched the ballistic evidence recovered at the dock, and Nora felt a surge of vindication. Grayson was the true culprit. He had orchestrated Reyes's murder, framed Jacob, and used his influential position to quash any opposition. Determined to reopen Jacob's case, Nora hurriedly compiled all the evidence into a detailed file for submission to a judge. Just then, Ray called again, his voice urgent. "Grayson suspects I've betrayed him," he whispered, breathless. "I've heard that something big is about to happen. Jacob might be in immediate danger." At that exact moment, chaos erupted within the prison. A staged riot broke out as multiple inmates feigned conflict to distract the guards. Amid the confusion, masked figures infiltrated Jacob's cell block, swiftly subduing him with a chokehold, binding his wrists, and hustling him through a side exit toward a waiting truck. Muffled and disoriented, Jacob felt the truck rumble away. He wasn't sure if his abductors were criminals or rogue officers, but he suspected they were linked to Grayson. By the time the vehicle finally halted, darkness had fallen, and the air reeked of salt and rust. Jacob was dragged into a vast C-Link warehouse, where the slick floor and flickering overhead lights only heightened the tension. Rough hands forced him to his knees, duct taping his wrists and ankles, while a gruff voice leaned in close to whisper, "You're going to disappear tonight, Officer Cooper." Just when all hope seemed lost, headlights blazed at the warehouse entrance. SWAT teams in full tactical gear burst inside, having tracked the location thanks to Nora's meticulous planning, tips from Ray, and Levi's digital tracking. Gunfire shattered the tense silence as the armed kidnappers dove behind crates, exchanging rapid bursts of fire. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces, while Jacob, still bound on the floor, tried desperately to inch away from the crossfire. From the shadows emerged Deputy Chief Marcus Grayson himself, wielding a specialized SWAT firearm. He barked harsh orders to his men, his cold eyes locking onto Jacob. "You should have died in prison," he snarled. "Now we have to do this the hard way." Before Grayson could pull the trigger again, a streak of fur darted between him and Jacob. Toby, attacking with swift precision, latched onto Grayson's arm with a flash of teeth. Enraged, Grayson cursed and fired, the bullet missing its target. In that split second, Jacob twisted free of his bindings enough to lunge behind a fallen crate for cover. Nora appeared with her weapon raised, flanked by SWAT officers storming in. "Grayson, drop the gun," she shouted. But Grayson, yanking his arm free from Toby's grip with blood dripping, aimed once more at Jacob. In a desperate move, Jacob tackled him, and the two crashed onto the concrete floor. Grayson's weapon clattered away as Toby pounced, seizing the deputy chief's wrist to prevent him from reclaiming it. Within moments, SWAT officers swarmed the area, cuffing Grayson and subduing his remaining cohorts. With Grayson in custody and his accomplices either dead or arrested, the entire money laundering operation and the network of corrupt officers was exposed. In the following days, news outlets broadcast images of Grayson's arrest and detailed the conspiracy that had shielded criminal syndicates through compromised police resources. Investigations revealed that C-Link had served as a major hub for funneling illicit funds via falsified shipping manifests, with Grayson using his influence to keep the operation under wraps. When Thomas Reyes threatened to expose everything, Grayson silenced him permanently and framed Jacob as the fall guy. Public outrage exploded, sparking protests and demands for comprehensive departmental reforms. A sweeping purge of corrupt officers ensued, with many senior officials resigning or losing their positions. For Jacob, however, there finally emerged a glimmer of hope amid the chaos. It didn't take long for a judge to review the overwhelming evidence of Jacob's innocence. His death sentence was swiftly overturned, and he was released amid a storm of mixed reactions. Some colleagues were ashamed they hadn't believed him, while others offered quiet apologies. Once free, Jacob was given the opportunity to rejoin the force, even being promoted to his former post. The department, eager to restore its tarnished image, hoped that seeing Jacob back in uniform would symbolize a return to integrity. But the depth of betrayal he had suffered was too great, and he declined the offer. Standing outside the courthouse where he had once been condemned, Jacob patted Toby on the head, feeling the dog's warm affection as it licked his hand. In that moment, he experienced a blend of relief, gratitude, and a bittersweet sense of loss. After dedicating years to upholding the law, only to have corrupt superiors nearly ruin his life, he realized he needed time to heal and to reconsider whether he still believed in the system he had once so faithfully served. About a month later, disillusioned by the way top brass had so easily shielded criminals, Nora made a decision of her own. She turned in her badge and left the department, unwilling to be associated with a system rife with corruption. Teaming up with Levi, she opened a small private investigation office in a modest downtown building. The sign proudly read, "Mitchell and Associates, Private Investigations." Their mission was simple: to stand up for clients who had nowhere else to turn, whether victims of official misconduct or everyday people swindled by powerful interests. Though she left the official structures of policing behind, Nora embraced the freedom of charting her own course. Meanwhile, Jacob spent his days readjusting to life outside prison. He wasn't eager to dive into work right away. Instead, he reconnected with old friends, reorganized his personal finances, and attended therapy sessions to process his trauma. Through it all, he leaned heavily on Toby, whose unwavering companionship served as a daily reminder that not all loyalty had been tainted by corruption. Yet, despite everything he had experienced, Jacob's innate sense of justice remained strong. One day, he stopped by Nora's new office, coffee in hand, joking, "Need a consultant?" Though there was a sincere undertone in his voice. Nora welcomed him, gesturing to an empty desk, and soon he was poring over files, offering insights drawn from his years on the force. Toby lounged at his feet, occasionally perking up whenever the conversation turned to suspicious shipments or shady corporations. Word of their success spread quickly. Their very first case involved exposing a corrupt contractor who had embezzled funds from local charities. Levi uncovered hidden bank records, while Jacob and Nora gathered on-the-ground evidence. Toby even played a small but pivotal role by sniffing out a location where crucial documents were stashed. The renewed sense of purpose was invigorating for Jacob, even if it was no longer tied to an official badge. In time, Nora, Jacob, and Levi became known as relentless investigators. Local media began reporting on their work, praising their dogged pursuit of the truth. And Toby remained the team's beloved canine companion, a gentle giant recognized by the community for once saving his handler from wrongful imprisonment. Every day brought new leads, new clients to protect, and new secrets to expose. Although Jacob might never don a uniform again, he remained at his core a defender of justice. With Nora, Levi, and Toby by his side, he knew they could shine a light into even the darkest corners of their city. And so, his story truly began anew, not as an officer, but as a free man determined to forge a path where integrity could thrive. No badge required. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this story to more people, because I believe that justice will always be with you.